Everyone, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rigo Villa, Community Manager on the Cisco Learning Network, and I'll be your host for this webinar. In today's session, we will be covering ISE REST APIs with our speaker and presenter for today, Thomas Howard. But before we get started, I wanted to share a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, I do want to let our attendees know that our presenters are currently working from home, so if we run into any technical issues during the webinar, we'll do our very best to resolve it as soon as possible. So we just want to thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Next, if you have any questions during the session, we ask that you please post them in the question and answer panel, as that would help our panelists keep track of all of the questions and would also allow them to provide you with a much more timely response. Also, if you experience any audio issues during the live presentation, I do recommend using the call-in telephone number that I'm going to be posting in the chat window here in just a moment. And at the end of this webinar, you will get a pop-up survey with a couple of questions about today's presentation, and we would really appreciate it if you can just take a moment to fill it out and share with us any thoughts or feedback that you may have. I also want to let our attendees know that this session will be recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing within about 5 business days after today, and I'll be sure to post some more information about that in the chat window a little bit later on. And last but not least, we will be launching a couple of poll questions throughout this presentation, and when we are ready to launch one of these polls, we'll be sure to announce it live, and then you will see it pop up on your webinar event screen, and then that's when you'll have an opportunity to submit your answers. So we hope that you all can participate. And with all that said, I'm now going to turn it over to our speaker to get the presentation started. So Thomas, if you're ready, please take it away.
Yeah, Rigo, thank you. Hi, everyone. Glad you're here for the ISE REST APIs webinar. So let's get started with a question, as Rigo was talking about. The first poll question is we want to find out what is everybody's REST API experience so far. We want to find out where you're at. So if you can go ahead and answer the poll question that should have popped up on your screen. Answer and we'll find out where everyone's at. And what I want to do is go ahead and kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today. First, I want to give you a little bit of history of how we got here with REST, or representational state transfer. Talk about how it works with ISE, and then most of the time I actually want to spend doing demos of these tools, because I think this is a great foundation for you to use REST APIs with ISE and just about any other product or piece of software out there. And then, of course, there's going to be lots of resources, including a GitHub repository for you to go play with this code, and you'll be able to hopefully go do some of this stuff on your own. So with that, Rigo, what did people say for the first poll?
All right, so for our first poll results, so I'm looking at those now, and I can see that the majority of participants still consider themselves a noob.
All right.
And then the following answer here, we have those who have experience with Postman. Well, actually, sorry, Python and then Postman.
Okay, perfect. I'm very glad everyone's here. This is exactly kind of the audience we're trying to target. I think we got something for everybody here today, so this is perfect. Thank you, Rigo. So remind everybody, if you do have questions, we have an awesome set of panelists here to answer your questions about ISE, not just REST APIs, but anything ISE. So go ahead and ask away in the Q&A panel. Hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for some additional open mic questions or something. So next thing I want to know is, what platform are you guys using? What's your daily driver? What are you using as your main computer? So Rigo just launched that poll. If you want to go ahead and respond there. And I'm looking at your main computer for doing, REST APIs and development. I'm sure you guys use Linux and Android, but I hope we don't have too many people doing REST API stuff on their mobile phones. All right. So with that, I want to start with the background on how we got here. So in the beginning, people made businesses which had to track inventory and build products. And that was done using labor from a workforce, and they had to track their employees so that they could make some money. And they knew they made money because they made a lot of reports, right? And so what happened is, over time, people realized the way to track all this is with spreadsheets. And so they had a lot of paper spreadsheets where they would track all this stuff manually, rooms full of people updating spreadsheets constantly. And then eventually we came into the computer age, And we tried to consolidate all these spreadsheets into mainframe computers. And now people did their entry updates in these terminals. And we could store all this stuff on these mainframes. And then eventually we got to a point where the mainframes got a little smaller, and they got more storage. They could have more databases and things. And what happened is some smart folks over at IBM created the standard query language. And what this does is this standardizes sort of the operations that you do on putting data into a computer and getting it out. And the main operations there are the insert, when you want to create an object or a resource; the select, this is where you want to basically do a query or a get to, or a search to return something. You may want to do an update. So you need to make a change, someone's address or account balance, whatever it is. And then you need to be able to delete something. So these are the fundamental things that the standard query language standardized. This was back in the early 1970s. So this has been going on for, a good 50 years now. Eventually, we really went from the mainframe, kept distributing. Now we have this client server over the network model. And this allowed for other folks to come in besides just IBM. And as we were doing these queries, we could kind of standardize this SQL interface. And now we had lots of vendors coming in, implementing SQL. And this was really one of the first successful, not a network protocol, but a protocol that you could use over a network to get information to other computers in a distributed environment. And this is where you see a lot of programming languages start to adopt SQL clients. That's one of the very first things that most people want to do when they implement applications on these different clients talking to these database servers. So along comes something radically different in the 90s, which is HTTP. And what you see there in the first incarnation in 1.0 is we had a get operation, and then we had a post operation. So the get is basically that select equivalent in SQL, and then the post operation is to create something. And if you remember back in the 90s, get meant, give me a web page basically with images and other things, and the post meant submit a form. That was pretty much all you could do in the mid 90s. And this was all started, by Tim Berners-Lee back in 1996. So something a lot of people don't know is there was this other guy listed on that first RFC named Roy Fielding, and he is actually the father of REST. And so what you see happening, so as of 96, they then go off and they do, internet starts to explode. HTTP is very popular. They go off and they do an update for HTTP 1.1, and now you start to see not only the get and the post, but you see a put and you see a delete. And now if you think about it, this is that insert, select, update, and delete. It's all there now. And there's actually some other options they built into it as well. There's even a patch. I forgot to put the patch on this page, but that's another important operation, which we'll talk about. So what you see now is actually Roy Fielding became the lead on this HTTP 1.1 RFC, and Tim Berners-Lee's in there somewhere. And this all happened in 1999. Well, forward to the next year, and you see Roy Fielding actually did his doctoral dissertation on something called representational state transfer. And this is where he outlines these concepts of doing operations over a network and what kinds of things are really important to make that happen. So I'm not going to go into each of these in detail, but I think client server, that's pretty obvious. This concept of being stateless means that we're able to execute transactions, create, read, update, delete in a stateless form, meaning that the server doesn't need to keep track of this ongoing state. It can just do a single transaction and be done. And this is also very important in databases. The ability to cache things in the network can be important for efficiency. Having a uniform interface, being able to use URLs to address resources in a distributed network, that was still fairly new, right? With HTTP. And so that was an important part of this. And then the ability to layer things. What this means is basically we can compose things in our network, break it down into different services. And what's interesting now is, again, this was over 20 years ago, But now this is ultimately what cloud computing is all about, is the ability to, encapsulate services, microservices, things like that. So that's why you see this is a very popular topic these days. So when we're doing all this stuff, we do it because ultimately we're trying to get data in and out of a computer. And so if you're not a real big programmer, I wanted to just kind of share with you what this looks like. So when we start out, almost all data can be represented in these ways. So there's a concept of nothing, right? Where none or empty or whatever it is, zero. And then there's a Boolean, and there's lots of different ways to represent Boolean objects. Then we have numbers. It could be an integer, a float, something like that, a decimal point. And then you guys are probably all familiar with strings, right? I had to put an ACL in there, or at least an ACE. And then you can have lists of things that all belong together or same type of thing. And then one that's really important, and those of you that have been doing ISE with Radius, you should know key value pairs very, very well, since that's how Radius works. And then finally, you have this concept of an object, which really kind of assembles all of these things into a single entity. And so you can use key value pairs to represent individual attributes of an object, and then the actual representation can be a Boolean, a string, a number, even a list, or another object. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we say we're going to be doing representation of resources in the network. Is ultimately we're trying to boil it all down into this representation of data like this, okay? And that process you may hear is often called serialization, and it gets serialized into a couple different forms. One that's been around for a very, very long time is XML. That was really where we started because, back in the 1990s, markup languages were very popular because of HTML. And so XML is where we got started with this encapsulation and serialization of objects. Then in the 2000s, we started to see JavaScript become more popular, and it had this great notation for objects that it uses. And so we started to see JavaScript object notation, or JSON, start to take over. And I think you can see very quickly by looking at these two why JSON won at the end of the day, is because it's far more compact, much more readable. And so people obviously like it a lot more. So with that, we come to ISE now. And Rigo, before I get into this, I need to ask, what operating system were people using? I forgot to go back and ask that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the operating system, it looks like our clear winner here is Windows, based on the answers. That actually got the overwhelming response.
Okay.
And then next in line, we have Mac OS.
Excellent. And probably a few Linux people out there?
We actually, let me double check here. Yeah, we do have a little bit of Linux.
Okay, good. We'll have something for everybody today. So that's good. And I'm glad no one's using Android and iOS for their main computer. That's a good thing. So that's pretty much what I expected. And so what I wanted to do is basically talk with you all about this idea of representational state transfer in ISE. So the way this works is, I think you're all familiar with URLs, and you want to be able to access some resource in the software. In this case, it's ISE. So we have you as a user, you can be running an application in a terminal, command line like curl. You can be doing Postman, or we can have applications running in containers or on servers, or we can even have other applications talking to ISE. So no matter what scenario you want to do, any one of these things can use REST to communicate with ISE to control, to create, read, update, and delete effectively any of these objects inside of ISE. And that's really the power of it. So with that, I wanted to ask you the next question, which is, what was the first version of ISE, do you think, that had REST APIs? So Rigo's going to pop that question up for you. There it is. Go ahead and tell me what you think the answer is to that. And I want to explain that ISE actually has 3 different types of REST APIs today. The first is what we call external RESTful services. That is our traditional REST API. This is where you control configuration of various resources inside of ISE. That's your your endpoints, your users, your network devices, things like that. Then we also have M&T, your monitoring troubleshooting node. It has its own REST APIs for being able to query sessions. And then we also have pxGrid. If you're doing pxGrid, you have the ability to do queries on different endpoints that pxGrid knows about. So we support all three of these REST-based APIs. Each one's a little bit different. I'm going to focus on ERS today because that's your traditional configuration, updating of objects in ISE. But just know that you can go look at those URLs down below. We have full documentation for that, and then we also have the GitHub for pxGrid if you want to learn more about that. I would love to do a whole separate webinar just on the pxGrid stuff, but it won't be today. So for all these different nodes on ISE use different REST APIs, and they work on different ports. And so what we're trying to do is we're consolidating. You may remember from the ISE 3.0 What's New session that we did that all these different ports, it gets kind of confusing. And so what we're trying to do with this API gateway in ISE 3.0 is begin to consolidate all of those different services onto a single port through this API gateway, and then it will magically route those REST queries to the appropriate nodes. So you don't have to worry about that. It'll simplify things for you. So we did that for just the UI and the M&T. We built the API gateway in 3.0. Hopefully in 3.1, we're going to see the ERS REST API and the pxGrid be supported in the API gateway, but that remains to be seen when 3.1 comes out. But that's the plan. So when we look at these URLs, you guys are all very familiar with these, right? This is all part of RFC 3986, the way this is specified. We don't always use the fragment portion in REST, so just be aware of that detail. But here's what a typical resource might be, or URL would be in REST. So we're going to a specific server on a specific port. We have there's your server with an endpoint or path. So when you hear the term endpoint, that just means the path to a resource. That's the endpoint somewhere on the server. And then you may also have query parameters. You can use these. Basically, these are attribute value pairs that you could use to do a select, a search, a query, or potentially even you could do updates. We also have this idea that everything leading up to the resource can be a base URL. You're going to see this a lot when we start to get into the APIs. And then, of course, you have the actual resource itself that we're trying to manipulate. So those are some different terms I want you to have. And if you look at ISE, we have the PAN node, we have the M&T, and the pxGrid node. Just like I said, each of these has different paths, different objects, things like that you want to manipulate. And I'll also point out that we have ways to use query parameters for different select or search operations within ISE. So we can do it for paging. So if you have 1,000 network devices, you can't get all of them at once. You actually need to page through them. By default, it's 20 at a time, but you can do up to 100 at a time. And so you may have to actually fetch multiple pages to see all 1,000 network devices. You can also filter. I find the syntax a little weird myself. So I prefer just to, when I'm playing with this, I'd rather just download everything myself and then do my own filters and scripts and whatever, but this is available if you want to take the time to go through it. And then sorting. So by default, it will sort ascending, meaning, A to Z or, 0 to 1. But you can switch that around if you want to pick a specific field and then sort on that. So these are some different options when you do your queries, if it helps you to narrow down the objects you're looking for in ISE. So this is a list as of ISE 3.0 of all the different objects or resources in ISE that you can do some kind of a REST operation on. You can't create, read, update, and delete every single one of these. Different resources support different operations. Most of them you can do everything, but not all of them. So you just have to read the documentation to find out what you can do on each resource. So we have things like our guest user. That is very special. I'm going to call him out right now. We will revisit this. And then Rigo, I want to find out what was the answer to our poll for the first version of ICE with REST APIs.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Our top answer shows that most participants went with version 2.0. And then for the next top answer, the results show version 1.2 and then version 1.3.
Okay.
Both were actually very close to a tie.
Okay. Cool. So I actually put this in the introduction of the webinar invite, and the answer is 1.2. So I'm surprised more people didn't know it was 1.2. But that just goes to show you that people think it's a fairly new thing, but we've actually been doing this for a long time. And we keep improving ICE with each release. We keep adding more objects, more capabilities. So just be looking for that. Just expect more in the future as we continue to do more REST-based operations. So with that, the way you enable ERS in ICE is to go ahead and just enable it in this ERS settings page under administration system settings. And then you're also going to see this other option for CSRF check. Don't worry about this. Leave it disabled unless you know why you want it. In that case, go ahead and use it to your heart's content. Otherwise, just ignore it. Don't pay attention to it. Just go about your normal business with REST. We have two specific administrative groups for dealing with REST operations. We have an ERS admin and we have an ERS operator. Basically, admin does read and write privileges and the operator is read only. So if you have someone that you want to give them access to read stuff but not to change things, you want to make them an operator, put them in the ERS operator group, right? And then one thing I will let you know right now is no, you cannot specify that an operator is only allowed to change network devices or only allowed to change internal users or ACLs or something like that. You have to do it. It's all or nothing, read and write or read only. So just keep that in mind when you go to allocate people to your project. So guest user, this one's special. We have a bug outstanding on it, but I don't think this is going to get fixed anytime soon. So just be aware that when you want to manipulate guest users, you must use a local user that is a member of all accounts. Basically, they're a sponsor, and they need to be in the all accounts group. And when you do that, you need to go ahead and open up all accounts, and at the very bottom, scroll all the way down, and there is an option to allow them access to use the guest REST API. So this is how you are able to manipulate the guest user. The guest user actually has, I think, more options than any other resource because that is fundamentally one of the main services that got a lot of attention with REST APIs. So if you want to do it, just keep in mind you got to have a special account that's actually a sponsor account, and you need to enable it to get REST access in all accounts. And I'll show you an example of that. So with that, what tools? I heard we have a lot of noobs out there, but maybe you guys have played with some of this stuff, but we also have people that have done Python and Postman. So what are the tools that you guys use for doing REST APIs today? I'd love to hear that. So Rigo's going to put that poll question up. There it is. And I'll come back and see what you guys said. So with that, we are going to talk about these three things today. Curl is something that's been around for many years, since the mid 90s at least, when they started doing HTTP. Really, it means that you're able to fetch a URL through the command line. And so that's a great utility to start out with, and that's what we're going to do. Postman is actually about almost 10 years old now, I think, and it is really probably the most popular tool out there. It's a graphical interface, and I think it's actually a web application as well, where you can run these different requests and actually store them. And that's really the power of it, is being able to store them and refer back to them. And we're going to be doing that in our demos today as well. And finally, Python is one of the oldest programming languages out there. It actually predates JavaScript by a few years. 1991 is when it got started. And it's slowly grown over the years, and now is one of the most popular programming languages. And it's very popular among the the programmatic interface people, and the network APIs, things like that, very, very popular. So that's why we're going to go with Python. So first, curl. Client URL, very simple, right? And it does more than just HTTP. It does a lot of stuff, a crazy amount of stuff. So if you're looking to do some kind of a quick script with the command line, curl is probably the go-to tool for a lot of people. Supported on all the major platforms, but it's native actually in Windows and Mac OS, because at the end of the day, they're both based on a Unix kernel. Windows especially, you have to go ahead and download that, but there's another option for you I would recommend, and that is if you want to go ahead and install something called WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux. It will actually go ahead and install a Windows a Linux hypervisor of your choice onto your Windows box, and that will give you the full set of Unix utilities. And that's probably the best way to go about doing this, rather than just installing a single executable. So keep that in mind if you want to play with it on Windows, since that is the majority of people out there today. You look into WSL if you haven't already. So with that, I think it's time that we do a little demo. So let's flip over to our command line. And what we want to do is I want to bring up my list of commands here. So first thing we're going to do in curl is I'm going to try and fetch a resource. And so first thing we do is we went to go get the home page of my Icebox, and we immediately get a 301 move permanently error. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and add an option in to go to the moved location. So basically follow the redirect is what we're going to do with this. And when we do that, okay, now we get a page, but let's see. Okay, so it looks like we were able to get the page, which is fantastic. But this is just the standard ISE homepage to log in, right? So this isn't quite what we want. So what we want to do is we actually want to do more of a REST resource. And the way we do that is we need to specify port 9060 in the case of ERS. And then we have to do the path to the resource, which is ERS config endpoint group. In this case is what we're going to do. All right. Oh, okay. Whoops. So I need to do HTTPS, it tells me, so that's fine. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going through and I'm making these mistakes. I could just do a perfect query for you, but I want you to see how you're able to go ahead and try these different things. And look, now we get nothing, right? So that's not very helpful. So what we want to do is let's go ahead and let's look at the headers. And I'm doing this because I want you to see how you may need to do some troubleshooting of your own. So what happens is now that I'm looking at the headers, it says, sorry, you are unauthorized with the 401. That means we need to do some credentials. And so for that, let's go ahead and let's add some credentials in here. So I've got mine already spelled out to save you guys. I don't think anybody wants to see me type. That's pretty boring. So I'm just going to paste those in here. And now, cool. So now we got some data out, but we still have an error, something about a resource media type unsupported. And it looks like that's what happens with the 415. And the reason for that is because when doing REST, we need to tell the computer what data we want out of it, what the format is that we want. And so for that, we actually need to include a header. And that looks like this. Let me scroll back. And I want to add the header in there. And basically we're going to tell it we want, or we are willing to accept XML. Aha, there we go. There's our XML data coming out of ISE now with all of these endpoint groups. So that's nice, but this is kind of ugly, not very readable. So let's go ahead and let's do JSON instead. So the way we know we're supposed to do that is to come over here and ask for JSON instead of XML. Okay, there we go. Now it's much prettier. Okay, we can see, I'll scroll to the top. So notice that we got a HTTP 200. That means it's a good request. And we probably don't need these headers anymore. I'll get rid of those. But notice that the format, it says, okay, you did a query, a search, effectively, found total of 19 resources, and here they all are. Notice that they have a unique ID, a UDID it's called, a unique device identifier. Every resource has one of those, and it also has a name and usually has a description. And then they have a link. If you want more information, basically, you have to call endpoint group with this specific UDID. So let's do that for something like the Meraki device. So let's go ahead and let's just get this UDID here. So if we want to get more information about the Cisco Meraki device endpoint group, what we do is we do that, and then we specify, I want this specific endpoint group. So you give it that UDID, and now you can see we have a specific endpoint group. It's the one we requested. It's Meraki. We have a description, and it looks like the only more useful information is that it's a system-defined group. Nothing special, not a lot of good stuff in there. So it'd be interesting if we could find something that had a little bit more data that's of interest to us. So for that, let's go ahead and let's take a look at something like the hotspot portal. So this is a big one with a lot of options. So if I look at the hotspot portal, okay, so we have just one. So now let's go ahead and let's get the details on that. Okay, and this, you can see there are just tons and tons of fields and options to go through for the hotspot portal. So this is meant to show you that some objects, some resources have a lot of detail, a lot of options, and some only have just a few. So this is where you can get to play with it and get to know what your options are with these different resources. So a couple other things I want to show you before we move on to Postman is that we have some things like profiler profiles. So if we look at profiler profiles, what you can see is we have a total of 642 built into ISE, but we're only getting the first 20 by default, if you recall, right? If you want to get more, you'll notice the very last entry down here is for next page. And you can see that if we want to get the next page of profiles, we actually need to go to the next page. We can specify page number 2. And we could also change that size parameter from just 20 to up to 100. So if you want to iterate through a large list of, in this case, profiles, or if you wanted to do users, devices, whatever it is, you would need to iterate through all these until you collected all of them. And we're going to actually do that at the end of our demo today. So hopefully this gives you guys a really good idea of kind of how we interact on a basic command line. One other detail I want to show you is that, in general, putting your username and password into the command line, probably not a good idea, because if people walk by, saw your super secret password on the screen, probably not a good idea. And it's logged into your history and all these kinds of things. So rather than do that, a better way of doing this is to use something called environment variables. So I actually have a file here. I put it in it's called the .env file. So it's hidden normally in the directory because it starts with a dot. But if I look at that, I'm going to show you my super secret usernames and passwords that I use. So I'm actually specifying, if I want to talk to my ISE pan for the ERS stuff, this is the node that I'm talking to. I have a single standalone ISE node, so it's the same for all these nodes. So I have the pan, the M&T. I could also do a pxGrid one, or I could just specify a generic host name. But my normal ISE REST username is admin, and then I have my password. And then remember I told you about that special one for guest user with the guest API. I have an attribute for that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these, if I do a, if I want to look at my environment and see if those things are there today, let me see if I grep for ISE. They should not be there. So what I need to do is I need to put them into my terminal environment right now, and I'm going to do that by sourcing the .env file. And now I have these environment variables in my terminal ready to use. What that means, why that's significant, is because now, when I go back to that command line, I can come over here, and instead of showing people my username password combination, instead I can use environment variables. So I can say things like $ISE rest username, and I want to do the $ISE rest password. And now still works, but now my passwords are hidden. If I look in my history, you know, up here you can see that you have my super secret super admin username and password, and down here you don't get that, so people can't come and either snoop it and see it on your screen, or they can't see it in your history. So this is why it's more secure. This is a very a highly recommended method of doing this, and you're going to see this kind of thing as we move to Postman as well. All right, so with that, I think it's probably a good time to move to Postman. Let's get back over here and let's talk about Postman. So Postman is a great graphical user interface tool for creating APIs and collaborating in the building of them and using them. So it works on all these different platforms, and it includes a web app. And it does a lot of different things. It's really meant as like not only a collaboration tool for building APIs, but also for testing them. And we're going to focus on using it as an API client to do these queries, and we're going to use some workspaces to manipulate APIs on ISE. So one of the most important things here is we just talked about environment variables, and Postman has several different types of what they call variable scopes. And this is important because as you play with it, you may want to do local variables in certain scripts or in data that you import from like CSV files. And then you have your environment, similar to what we just talked about on the terminal. You have environment variables that you can change. I should probably show you what I'm talking about here. We have these environment variables that we can change. And this is really important when you want to do role-based access. If you want to change roles and see what the impact is, can you do these operations? For example, like with guest API or something. And then we actually have variables that we can put in the collection, and we're able to share these across different requests. And we also have global variables that we're able to use across collections. So depending on what you're trying to do, we have these different variables. And I'll mention that the priority starts with the local and works its way out. So if you have an environment variable that's the same as a global variable, the environment variable will take precedence. Same thing with the local variable. It will take precedence over the environment and over everything else. But know this because we're gonna cover this a lot. So with that, let's go take a look at Postman. So what we have here. Oh, by the way, what were our tools that people used for APIs? Rigo?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Let's see. So from the answers, the slim majority of participants are using Python. And then following very close behind are those who said to be using Postman and then curl.
All right. So it's curl, then Postman, then Python. Is that the priority order, the majority? Or...
No, sorry. So it's Python first, Postman, and then curl.
Ah, okay. All right, excellent. But glad to hear you guys are using these tools. That's fantastic. Hopefully you're going to learn something new with this. So in Postman, we take all of these different requests and we bundle them into what are called collections. And we put them inside of a workspace. So I have a new workspace here for you. We put them in collections, and then we have these different environments that we can use. Environments are also specified over here, and currently I don't have any environment specified. We'll show you how that works. But basically what you want to do is you have a collection, or no, we don't, we need to create one. So let's do that. So we have a new collection now. And inside of my new collection, I need to make a request. So if I want to get, one of those objects that I got previously, I would go ahead and get that endpoint group like I did before, and copy that. I'm just going to put that right in here. Okay. And if I send that, okay, nothing happened. Why is that? Well, if you look down here, so this kind of tells us these different options similar to what curl did across the top. And down here, you see the response, and you can see 401 unauthorized. Does that sound familiar? Right? So let's go back up here. For authorization, we can say we want to do basic auth and admin and my super secret password, you guys know. Let's try it again. Cool. Oh, look at that. Does this sound familiar? 415, unsupported media type, right? So what are we going to do? Well, we need to go into the headers like we did, and we need to specify that we are willing to accept application. I want JSON, right? So let's send it again. Bam, there it is. So just like we did in curl, we now have JSON for our endpoint groups. So that's how you can very quickly do the same kind of thing in curl, but in Postman. So what we want to do is let's go ahead and try to do something. Let's do, I think our time. Okay, I'm kind of worried about time, so I'm going to jump ahead. You can go ahead and you can do different kinds of operations here, right? So we talked about the ability to do, we've been doing gets. A post would allow you to create an object. In fact, you know what? Let's just do that right now. Let's take, because I want to show you some of these variables and things. Let's say we have an Apple iDevice. Okay, so here's the ID. We want to, what we want to do is we want to get the object and use that as a template for creating a new endpoint group. I'll show you how to do a post. So let's take this, let's copy it, and let's put it on the end like we did before. And let's go ahead and send that off. And now we have an Apple iDevice. So let's say we want to do a new endpoint group. Let's take that, we'll copy it, and I want to save and do get. So let's do let's duplicate this. This was for endpoint group. We can edit this so we know what we were getting with this URL call. And I want to duplicate it. And for this, I want to do a post. So I have to change it. So I'm not going to do, I don't specify the UDID when I do a post because ISE is going to create the UDID for me. But I do need to submit the object that I want to create. I don't create the UDID, ISE will do that. And we're not going to do an Apple device. We already have one of those. So instead, let's do let's do Amazon Echoes or something. Let's just update this. I'm using that template, right, to make it really fast and easy. And it's not system defined. This is one that we're creating on our own. And this link thing, you can actually delete the link. It's unnecessary. So really, the endpoint group is really very simple object. It's great to learn on. And we want to get rid of that trailing comma because that's unnecessary in JSON. But if we do this, okay, again, unsupported media type. The reason for this is because when we do a submission, so far we've been getting it and we're willing to accept JSON. Now what we want to do is we actually need to push up to the server. We need to tell it, we're going to give you some content, and the type is also going to be JSON, okay? 400 bad request. Oh boy, what did we do wrong there? Let's go back to our body. Endpoint group, name, description, system defined. All right, so here's where we get into the troubleshooting. Oh, here we go. So you can see in the body of the response, it told us, oh, looks like Thomas was practicing and he already made echoes. All right, let's do something different. Let's Let's do iPads. All right, try it again. Okay, cool. So look, 201 object was created, successful. Now, if we want to go find out what that thing was, what its UDID was, what we can do is we can go back. Let's query the endpoint group again. It's got to get rid of the specific one. We want to get all the resources for the endpoint group. We can see that now we have 20 of them. If I scroll to the bottom, where's my iPad? Let's search for iPad. There they are. Okay, we got iPads in here now. I got my unique ID. And so if I wanted to do a query on that, I certainly could. So hopefully you can see here how quick it was to get an object and use it as a template for building another type of that same object. And that's really what you're going to be doing a lot with REST APIs. Now, we can also do updates. We can also do deletes. And so to do that, rather than focus on doing it the hard way, I want to give you all a little gift, which is I have a site with Postman collections for you. So I have Postman collections for the ERS APIs, the M&T APIs, and pxGrid APIs. So what we want to do is let's go ahead and take this. I'm going to show you how to do an import. I'm going to copy this, copy the link location. I'm going to go into Postman, and we're going to import this. So at the end of the presentation, you'll get a link to this, and you'll be able to do this yourself. So we're going to import the link. And now, okay, so we did a couple of them the hard way. Check this out. So I've already gone through and I've built all this stuff up for you guys. So if you want to do endpoint groups, here they all are. We got gets, puts, posts, deletes. And I got some icons in here that show you I haven't really played a whole lot with the put options. I've still been building this out, but it'll get you, 95% of the way there. So for endpoint groups, if we wanted to go ahead and do an endpoint group, we could hit send. Bam, there it is, right? And now if I want to post an endpoint group, I've actually created, I put the template in here for you already, so you could just do a quick edit on it. You're ready to go. Or you'll also notice that, well, not there. Let's go here. I've added some tests. And what this does is Postman is kind of a testing tool, and it actually tells you right down here that when you run the tests, if it's successful or not. And it also allows you to do some JavaScript in here that allows you to set those environment variables like I just talked about. Now, I'm not actually setting environment variables because I have it set to no environment. But if I were to create an environment, this is something you're going to need to watch for. If I add an environment, I am now able to run a query. And if I look in my environment, new environment, dang it. Oh, let's try this again. All right, so if I look in my new environment, okay, look how I've populated the ID and the name. So I've done this using this bit of JavaScript because now as you hop between different requests, I've auto-populated the ID and the name. So now I can go down here to get endpoint by ID, send it, and it automatically knows that the ID I want was populated. Or I could even go in and I can edit this right now, and I can say, you know what, I really just want to get the iPads. Let's iPads. And I can come down here and I can say, get me the endpoint by group by name. And you can see I have a variable name in here I specified, so it knows that it's going to get it's going to substitute iPads in here for me. So if I send it, it got the iPads, right? So it's very, very useful to, and by the way, now that it's fetched this, my script is going to go through and it's going to update this so that it matches the iPads, both of these. And that's important because now if I want to delete the iPads, I can just go down to the delete request and it's got that ID from the iPads already in the environment ready to go. I can now submit. 204, that's actually successful. There's no content because I deleted the object, it's gone. And now if I go back and I look at endpoint groups again, give me the list, you can see I'm down to 19, which means there's no iPads in here anymore. So all of these requests that I built up for you, hopefully you can see how you're able to very quickly go through and do create, read, update, delete on all these different objects. And that'll be really good for you. Really fast. You can play with ICE and hopefully solve some of the problems you've been wanting to do with REST. And if nothing else, it's a great resource reference when you're building out REST APIs. So that's Postman. The other thing we want to do is talk about Python. So real quick, we only got like 9 minutes left, so I got to go fast. Lots of different development environments that you can use. Some people are perfectly happy using like Nano and VI on the terminal. That's fine. Or if you want to use something more like Atom or VS Code or PyCharm, those are sort of left to right, the easiest to the, you know, the more specific for Python. I happen to use Microsoft VS Code because I want to be able to do more than just Python, and it's free and it's excellent. So that's what you're going to see me using today. And one thing that I want you to understand about this, I tried to understand, like, when should I be using Python scripts versus, or even JavaScript versus a GUI versus curl. And this was the best quote I could find on it. So GUIs are easy, we know that, right? But then when you're trying to do something very specific, it can be very, very hard and tedious. And a CLI can be very hard to learn, or it can be really simple at first, but then the really crazy stuff you can still do. So I love that. Lots of different scenarios you may want to do. Hopefully you saw that if we want to try and get a list of all of our endpoints or our users, our profiles, network devices, we had to go through and page. So that iteration, going through all those pages and collecting those objects and resources, that's something that's fairly hard to do you can't do it with curl. Curl does one page at a time. In my experience, Postman doesn't work very well. That's not really what it's meant for. Maybe somebody knows how to use it better than I do, but it was too hard, so I gave up. Python's great for doing stuff like that. And then if you want to not only get a list of all of your objects, but then you need to go down to that next level of detail and get more than just the ID and the name. You want to get more of those attributes. Now you have to go get details about all those objects. So this is where a script to go through and do multiple things can be very, very useful. The one I want to show you today is actually that third bullet, combining multiple steps to do a rotation of radius secret keys. Let's see if we can get all that done in time. I'll save that question to the end. What we want to do is over here, I actually need to set up my environment real quick. And the way I do that is it's generally a good idea to have a virtual environment set up. I'm going to set up a virtual environment here. So if this is all new to you, don't worry about it. But note that this is generally a best practice when you're coding stuff up. We're going to run a virtual environment. So I'm running Python 3.7 in my terminal here. I'm going to go into the shell, and we're going to use a library called requests. It's a very, very popular library for doing Python scripting. And while that's installing, I'm going to go back to Postman, because when we were getting this endpoint group, we did it in with Postman. But check this out. Over here on the right-hand side, there's this little code option. And when you click on that, it will actually pop out the code for doing that exact operation in Python, or we could do it in curl, right? Hopefully these options look fairly familiar to you guys. So let's go back to Python. And what we're going to do, get a head start, we're just going to copy and paste this code right here. We're going to launch VS Code. Where's VS Code? VS Code. Why isn't it launching? Okay, well, it doesn't want to launch. That's weird. Let me see. It does not want to launch today. Strange. All right. So let's come over here. Let's bring this window up and let's use this one instead. And let's put a new one up. And here is our script. What we want to do is we want to be able to, this is the final script all built out just in case, but I wanted to walk through this with you guys. If we save this off as it is right now, get network devices. Oh, you did endpoint groups. We're going to do network devices, I think, instead. That's more interesting. Network device, not network devices. So this is the basic structure. We've got it saved. If we go back to our terminal, I'm going to flip back and forth to run this thing. So if I look here, I've got my script that I just created. It's not going to run unless we change the permissions on it, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, there it is. So now if we run it, we get problems, command not found. And the reason why is because we need to include what's called the shebang at the top. This is what tells these scripts what interpreter to use. In this case, pound bang, USR, bin, end, and Python. This tells it, look for Python and run the script with Python. So now if we save that, cool, there it is. Look familiar? So just like what we did in curl and with Postman, we're doing the same thing, but now in Python. So what we want to be able to do here is get all of our network devices. If I scroll to the top, we have 122, which means we got to do a lot of paging at only, 20 per page. So what we want to do is we want to go grab this next page object and iterate through it until we don't have it anymore. So what we want to do is loop through the pages. We want to save our resources, put them all into one big resource collection. And then ideally we would be able to update a resource. In this case, like if we wanted to do a rotation of our radius pre-shared keys. So we would change our pre-shared keys. This is something that would not be very easy to do in Postman because it would just take a bunch of different requests. You have to customize it each time. To me, it's much, much easier to do in something like Python. So the way we do this is, in the interest of time, I got to make it really fast. So I am going to go ahead and cut to the chase here. So what I want to do is we're going to loop through pages. So we got resources. We're going to put it into a list. We're going to loop over the URLs. While we have a URL, which is defined up here, we're going to get the resources, put them into the resource list. And if at some point that URL on the next page doesn't exist, we'll just mark the URL as none, and then it will stop the loop, and then we can take our resources and print them out. So I'm going to close that, save it, and let's see if this runs. Okay, so it's complaining about the request library is complaining about certificate verification being turned off. You can turn off that warning, not a big deal. But look at that. We just went through and we got all of our network devices, all 100 and something of them. There's the UDID, and then we printed the name. And then if we want to go through and actually change the radius attributes, I've got code in here to do that. I'll be posting this to my GitHub for you all. I'll be posting this whole file, and you can see what that looks like. If I go and is my ISE still up? Let's see. Hopefully I can show you my network devices. There we go. If I go look at one of my network devices here, what I basically want to do is I want to be able to rotate my pre-shared keys. So I want to be able to have a secondary one so that I can use start to use a new one, and then over time I can rotate those out. Rather than do it by hand manually, right? Having to come in, click the checkbox, put the secret in. I can actually do it all by putting in a pre-shared key via script, via REST APIs. So I'm going to take this. I know I'm cheating here with pre-built code, but in the interest of time, what I want to do, oops, it's over here. Let's go ahead and save that. And now what we're going to see is, if I run that same script again, it's going to go through, gather up my list of devices, and now it's going to fetch each one individually, get the details about it, and it's going to update the radius pre-shared keys in those devices to have a secondary key that I can now use. So while that's going on, I can come back over to ISE, and I can take a look at my network devices. And if I click on one of them, I'll just try this one now. Check it out. There's my old one, and here's my new one. So I was able to go through and create that automatically, and I didn't have to sit here all day and check the box, add the pre-shared key in, and hopefully this is going to get done real soon. And sorry, everyone, I ran over time on this, but doing these demos does take time to explain everything. So I'll just say, we'll worry about the poll later. A lot of great resources out there for you on Cisco's DevNet. We have a special microsite just for ISE. Lots of great things, lots of trainings. If you want to go deeper into Python, deeper into Postman, all that stuff is out here. They've got fantastic videos and also sandboxes. You can actually play with ISE, whether it's pxGrid or REST APIs. You can go schedule those and play with them for free. And all these resources are out there, everything we talked about today, including my GitHub repo where you're going to find this stuff. All right, Rigo, sorry for going over.
Oh, no worries at all, Thomas. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much. And I actually see that our panelists did an amazing job of handling most of the Q&A. So I think we're pretty good there. So thank you so much to our panelists as well. Yeah, so I want to thank you so much, Thomas, for speaking about this topic of REST APIs with our audience. I really hope that everyone found great value in the information and resources that were shared here today. I would also like to extend a very big thank you to each and every one of our panelists for lending a hand with all of the questions throughout the webinar. We really appreciate your support. And just a quick reminder to our attendees that you will receive a short pop-up survey as soon as you exit. We would be so grateful if you can just take a few minutes to complete it and just let us know how you like today's presentation. We always look forward to receiving your valuable feedback. And again, for those of you who are interested in revisiting this session, we will have the recording available for on-demand viewing within about 5 business days after today. For your reference, I'm going to go ahead and post the link in the chat window here in just a moment, but you will also be receiving a follow-up email that will contain that very same link. So please do keep an eye on your inbox for that. So thanks again to Thomas, to our panelists, and to all of our attendees for joining us here live today. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.